Golden Age Final Fantasy games are collectively known for their turn-based battle systems, with each game having a slight twist on an ability system for combat. Arguably the most successful and most enjoyed of these is the Materia system from Final Fantasy VII. Beyond its function as a combat mechanic, Materia is also one of the most diegetically compelling. How it synergizes with the lore and the world of FF7 heightens the sense of immersion within the game, but to fully understand it we must explore subtleties within the game's text and also garner a fundamental understanding of the concept of the Lifestream. So let's explore what exactly Materia is, how and why it functions, and what effect does it have on the world of Final Fantasy VII. To begin, let's look, in brief, on how Materia functions as a game mechanic. Materia is the primary mechanic by which you give attributes and abilities to your characters in FF7. It is used firstly in the strategic planning stage outside of battle, which then gives rise to what commands you can use on each character's turn when discreetly controlling them in battle. Materia can be found all over the game's world, from being found in spots on field maps, bought in shops, interactions with NPCs, prizes from minigames, and initially equipped on party members you recruit. Materia are, in essence, coloured orbs attached to slots within your character's equipped weapons and armour. Each weapon and armour will have a different configuration of materia slots. If your character has no materia equipped, the only abilities they would have access to is simple attack command and to use items. For gameplay purposes, there are 5 types of materia, each denoted by a different corresponding colour. The most abundant and most straightforward is the green magic materia. Equipping this to your character will give you access to the corresponding magic spell that is the namesake of the materia for the cost of some of your magic points. These range from offensive magical spells of different elements, curative healing magic, buffs and debuffs, and status altering spells. They are the workhorse of any balanced party. Here, we have equipped ice magic, and now in battle, under magic, I can cast ice. Next, we shall consider red summon materia. Summons can be thought of as more powerful versions of an offensive green magic materia. They are generally more costly to use than the green materia, but the trade-off is that the summon is an entity that attacks all enemies for big damage. They can initially only be summoned once per battle. Moving away from classical magical abilities, we have the yellow command materia. When equipped, this adds a new ability in battle or augments an existing ability. These commands do not cost magic points, but often do not deal or heal damage, usually having some adjacent utility. Here, I have equipped steel materia. Now I have a new command I can use in the battle menu, where I can attempt to steal from an enemy. After this, we come to look at blue support materia, and herein lies the nuance and complexity of the materia system and where it really comes into its own. Given its namesake, because on its own it does nothing, but when paired with any of the 3 previous materia types discussed, it augments and enhances the properties of those materias. Note the materia slots on Cloud's weapon, the Buster Sword. You can see how the 2 material slots are bridged. So therefore, we can link 2 materias. When compared to his armour, the Platinum Bangle, we can see that the material slots are separated. So while still having slots for 2 materia, we cannot link them with support materia. The most simple, classical example of using support materia is linking a simple green magic spell with the blue support materia named All. If we combine these 2 in a linked materia slot, the green magic command we have equipped will now be able to target everyone. Take this example. Cure Magic usually heals hit points to one of your party members each time it is used, but now we have linked the materia with All, in one turn it can now heal all party members, with the trade-off of it healing each party member slightly less effectively. We can also press R1 to still have the option to target just one party member if we so wish. However, this is literally the tip of the iceberg of what you can achieve with support materia, as this type contains many different augmentation properties being compatible with a vast number of materia. The final category is purple independent materia, which functions almost exactly opposite to the previous materia. Independent materia does nothing when paired with other materia, but instead provides standalone passive buffs or augmentations to your character's stats or behaviour. A typical example would be HP Plus materia. Equip this materia anywhere on your character and you receive an immediate corresponding percentage increase to your character's hit points. Simple. Or, equip counterattack materia to one of your characters. Now, once attacked, there is a corresponding percentage chance your character will automatically counterattack in battle. In addition to its core gameplay elements, materia also has a few smaller nuanced effects on gameplay. Firstly, as distinct from experience points you receive after a successful battle, you will also receive AP. AP is basically experience points for your materia. Given enough AP, your materia will level up, making them more powerful. For example, lightning magic at its base level will give us Bolt. When it levels up, we get Bolt 2, and then when it levels up again, we get Bolt 3. What attributes will be enhanced by leveling up is unique to each type of materia. For example, elemental materia, when paired with a materia with a certain element on your armor, will give a 50% damage reduction to that element at level 1. It will nullify the damage completely at level 2, and absorb that damage, restoring your HP at level 3. When materia gets to its final level up, it attains master level. When this happens, the materia undergoes a kind of mitosis, and a brand new piece of the same materia is born, but at its base level. This way, you can get multiple copies of super rare materia. Each materia can also have a unique effect on the base stats of the character that you equip it to. These can be both positive and negative, and are usually ideological to the nature of the materia. For example, it is common for green magic materia to increase our magical prowess, both offensively and defensively, at the cost of our physical prowess. Another example would be equipping steel materia, which is often associated with dexterity, and therefore naturally we get a +2 bonus to our dexterity. The first significant lore explanation about materia we encounter is during Cloud's Past flashback sequence, when encountering a Mako fountain in Mount Nebel. Sephiroth tells us that when Mako energy is condensed, materia may form. The knowledge of the ancients is sealed inside it, the knowledge to manipulate the power of the land. It connects us to the planet and allows us to call forth magic. And so, this is fundamentally the basis for how materia works. But before we go any further into discussing materia, I think we first need to get a grasp on what Mako energy, also known as the Lifestream, actually is. The terms Lifestream and Mako are largely interchangeable and are referring to the same thing. Somebody who is spiritually minded would tend towards more the Lifestream, and someone involved in industry or scientifically minded may tend towards more saying Mako. The lay person is also more likely to say this. Technically speaking, Mako energy is a highly condensed form of Lifestream, as explained by Budenhagen. But it is one of those cases where the specific noun also becomes a generic noun, and both states are referred to as Mako. In his observatory, Budenhagen also gives us a thorough explanation of what the Lifestream is. He explains, man must eventually die, but what happens after death? The body decays and returns to the planet, this much we all know. But what of consciousness, the heart, the soul? It too returns to the planet. The souls that return to the planet join together and race around it. They form a surge that rushes, converges, and separates constantly all over the planet. We call this the Lifestream, a path of spiritual energy which flows around the planet. Spiritual energy is the source for the life of trees, birds, and man. Not only creatures, the planet itself depends upon it. These are the basics of planetary bioscience. So, following this definition, but before we go further, as an aside, it is obvious that the Lifestream serves a heavy thematic purpose to the game. It is analogous to the environment and natural resources. It is symbolic of lots of Asian spiritual and religious doctrines. It can be contrasted with Western religion doctrines in the form of Genova and Sephiroth. It can be analogous to the collective conscious from Jungian psychology, and many more parallels can be drawn. But to stay focused at this point, I just wanted to acknowledge their existence, but for the sake of this video, I just want to concentrate on the internal lore of the Final Fantasy VII world. Given Budenhagen's explanation, we know that Lifestream is spiritual energy which flows around the planet. We also know that the knowledge that people accumulated in their lives is also returned to the planet, as Sephiroth explains that he himself became a traveller of the Lifestream and gained the knowledge of the Cetra and of the people that came after them. Hojo, in the Northern Cave, remarks on how Sephiroth must have avoided dispersion into the Lifestream, so we can infer that under normal circumstances, somebody's consciousness and experiences are dispersed, and as Budenhagen describes, this becomes a surge that rushes, converges and separates all over the planet. Therefore, the Lifestream is a dynamic, swirling ocean of previous knowledge and experiences. We also know that too much exposure to Mako can give someone Mako poisoning, as what happens to Cloud after the events of the Northern Cave on Disc 2. It is interesting that something that makes life possible in too large a quantity is actually harmful. Red 13 also tells us that under normal circumstances, Lifestream resides just under the seabed and occasionally gushes out to the surface. This information, when considered, raises interesting questions as to the sentience of the planet. When Ifalna and Aerith discuss talking to the planet, they refer to it as a single entity, and we know that Budenhagen says even the planet itself depends on spiritual energy. So is the planet its own single entity, or is it a collective sentience of the combined spiritual energy of the Lifestream? If the latter is true, it could mean that initially the planet had no sentience and was just full of spiritual energy devoid of any consciousness. However, once sentient beings came to exist and began to die and return to the planet, this gave rise to a consciousness or sentience of the planet. So if we consider the planet to be the true god of the FF7 world, then this god was actually created from the consciousness of the Cetra and the humans as they passed away. In conversation with Budenhagen in the City of the Ancients, he mentions the consciousness of the Ancients and the planet in the same piece of dialogue, suggesting that he feels that they are distinct. The definitive answer to this is left ambiguous, however. So then, within the world of FF7, Lifestream or Mako exists as spiritual energy imbuing all living things and the planet itself, as an energy source, and also as a compendium of knowledge of every sentient being that has ever lived. However, it is not unending and is actually finite. Now that we have a definition for the Lifestream, let's return to what Materia is. We know that it is Lifestream that condenses, and when condensing, it crystallizes into a materia. Budenhagen describes materia as concentrated spiritual energy, a shard of the planet's life. Sephiroth adds that the knowledge of the Cetra is sealed inside of materia. Therefore, materia can be thought of as concentrated knowledge given physical, wieldable form. Why this phenomenon occurs, or if there is any agency behind why it happens, is unknown. Perhaps when a critical wealth of knowledge coalesces by chance in the turbulence of the Lifestream, for example, the knowledge of how to call upon the power of the planet to make fire, this knowledge can condense into fire magic. We also know that materia can be made artificially and is not just naturally occurring. We know that Mako reactors can incidentally create huge materias. We also see how Lifestream can be purposefully condensed, as with Hojo's experiments outside the Genova chamber in the Nibelheim reactor. The Turks also comment that the materia in the sunken Gelnika was specifically created to fight Sephiroth. During Cloud's explanation of materia in the Beginner's Hall, he states that materia can unleash a hidden power within humans. We know that humans are descended from the Cetra when Sephiroth tells us in the Nibelheim basement that some Cetra forsook the itinerant way of life and also forsook their bond with the planet to lead easier lives. These people became humans. We also know, as Sephiroth states, that materia connects us to the planet and calls forth magic, so therefore, materia acts as a conduit between humans and the planet, reigniting the bond their ancestors once had with the planet. Not dissimilar to how in fiction, a magician may use a staff or wand to channel magic. These materia must be fitted into a person's weapons or armour to be used. However, outside of battle, we see that Aerith summons Holy, and it is placed in her hair ribbon, not into a weapon or armour. It is likely that the Cetra did not need to exclusively use materia to call forth magic, for if materia is condensed knowledge, someone who lived must have initially have had the knowledge to call forth magic for that knowledge to then enter the Lifestream once they died and eventually condense into a materia. Sephiroth states that the knowledge of the Cetra is sealed inside Materia. Also, we know from both Aerith and Ifalna that the Cetra are able to communicate with the planet. Ifalna refers to it as a planet reading, and we see Aerith do it multiple times throughout the game. Also, if we look at Aerith's limit breaks, unlike the vast majority of other characters' limit breaks, which appear to be a manifestation of their physical potential reaching its limit, Aerith's are much more classically magical in nature, both visually and in their effects. However, it is also likely that the Cetra also used materia as well as calling forth magic naturally, for they knew about the existence of both meteor and holy and kept them and seemed to understand how to use them. An interesting question arises as to whether the ancients were able to directly or indirectly cultivate the creation of materia. This raises an interesting question about summon materia. These entities can be considered ancient deities that the Cetra believed in, as almost all of them are inspired by gods and powerful supernatural beings from real life. So with what we already know about materia, we can infer that summon materia comes into existence because enough people who believed in a deity have their memories and beliefs condensed within the Lifestream, which then can go on to form the summon materia. In this way, the Cetra actually had a way of making their gods real, and in a sense created their own gods. It is unclear, however, if the Cetra could cultivate this on purpose, or if it was an event that happened as an indirect result of their belief systems. Therefore, it is also unclear if Meteor and Holy were cultivated on purpose or by accident, or if they were created by the Cetra or the planet. If created by the planet, it raises an interesting question about the nature of the sentience of the planet. Why would the planet create Meteor, a means by which to destroy itself? We know that the planet created the weapons, but once unleashed they seem to attack everything indiscriminately. To theorycraft too deeply into this would be moving too far away from the focus of the video, but it seems to hearken to a common compelling element of fiction relating to gods, where comprehending them or how they operate is impossible due to their inherently unknowable nature, and this wouldn't make any sense in purely human terms. If we speak to Yuffie on the Highwind whilst on our way to the City of the Ancients after the huge Materia quest, she questions, why does Materia always have something to do with magic and battle? The Ancients must have always been fighting. The implication here is that in the world of FF7, Materia has no utility outside of battle. However, there is a book in the Shinra library named Materia Production and its Military Uses, which could imply that its use in conflict is not immediately intuitive. Or perhaps the book is referring to larger scale conflicts rather than the skirmishes we ourselves get into. Common sense would argue that materia would almost certainly be used in everyday life and its people's occupations to make their labours easier. If it existed in reality, we would certainly do this. However, observing the people of the world of FF7 seems to confirm Yuffie's sentiment. We never see an example of an NPC using materia for a purpose outside of battle, or even discuss or allude to the fact that it may have such a use. No reasoning for this is ever given in the game. We can take a stab at interpreting some elements of the FF7 world to find some reasoning for why this is, but nothing close to concrete evidence. It is, however, worth mentioning that the core gameplay concept for FF7 is battles, and the diegesis for materia within that framework is well established within the game world. Outside of minigames or travelling and traversing, we don't really engage with the other elements of things that we can assume exist within the day-to-day lives of the people within the FF7 world. So perhaps the designers wanted to keep the discussion and lore around materia to strictly battle, and not to consider and therefore weaving into other aspects of life. This is a common trope we see in the fantasy genre, especially within video games, and especially within video games that centre around fighting. We don't often get any insight into how the fantastical elements that allow characters to achieve superhuman feats in battle would then affect ordinary people, and moreover, life outside of battle. So I certainly wouldn't hold this against FF7, but it remains a missed opportunity by the developers to explore this further. So strictly speaking, according to the evidence, materia only has a use within battle or conflict in the internal lore of the FF7 universe. Although this is still somewhat ambiguous, and perhaps we can theorise as to why this exactly is the case. Firstly, The process by which Lifestream condenses into materia only happens around knowledge arising from conflict for some reason. Although, having said that, there exist materia that we use in battle that would definitely have application in day-to-day life as well. Fire, haste, underwater, cure, revive, and so on. However, it is worth noting that we can actually use restorative magic outside of battle, and Zangan discusses using it on Tifa after saving her from the Nibelheim reactor in the Nibelheim incident. But these uses are all still connected to battle, as their need arises from injuries received in battle. Also, we must consider that, just like in real life, whenever something that would have universal utility in day-to-day life, that also will have military or conflict-based application, but is also scarce or expensive, it tends to be considered paramount that it is prioritized for warfare purposes above all else to ensure that battles are won, as they are a life and death situation. It is implied when in dialogue with the residents of Wutai that materia used to be more abundant there, but they had it taken off them after the war, much like how defeated nations in conflicts in the real world are forced to demilitarize. But is materia actually scarce? With the exception of summon and certain high-level materias, materia seems to be fairly common. When Cloud first meets Aerith, he remarks that nowadays you can find materia everywhere, and we do tend to find a lot of materia in the field maps throughout the game. However, that is often in an out-of-the-way place not commonly trod. But almost every settlement in the game has a materia shop, but they mostly sell low and mid-level green magic materia and some basic command materia. If we evaluate some of the human enemies in the game that are almost certainly using materia, they are often actually quite high up in the Shinra Corporation. Rude and Alina of the Turks are probably using materia, as well as members of Soldier. However, most other human enemies don't seem to make any use of it, relying on physical attacks, or in the case of Palmer, he uses a Mako gun to simulate magical attacks. Zack has some materia given to him by the Corporation when he goes with Sephiroth to investigate Nibelheim, and for some baffling reason they give him preemptive materia which isn't very useful. However, as discussed a bit later, this rarity of materia usage in human combatants may be more to do with being able to make use of materia rather than it being scarce, which it doesn't seem to be on the balance of the evidence. So if not scarce, is materia actually very expensive? As that is another potential roadblock to people being able to use materia. Now, it is hard to proportionalize how much materia is worth compared to other goods in the game and how much money people make, etc. But we can always attempt to do an approximation to try and relate it to the real world. Fortunately, there is one time in the game where we can actually buy food, which can be considered an immediate basic need of people in economic terms. In the Wall Market, the restaurant from which we obtain a pharmacy token, every meal costs 70 gil. Using this basis, we can do some really sad, ultra nerdy maths to try and calculate the cost of materia in general. So the restaurant is obviously what we call in England a greasy spoon cafe, a low-end express service establishment. The Wall Market is also not an affluent area, however it is situated within the capital of the world, Midgar. So I'm approximating that the same kind of restaurant in the capital of London would cost around 11 quid. So 70 gil is approximately 11 quid. So given that low-level green materia has an average price of around 640 gil, we can estimate that it costs around 100 quid or $127 or 117 euros in real-world money. So that doesn't immediately seem that it would be expensive. However, we should remember that it is likely that the people of FF7 do not enjoy as much disposable income or economic abundance as the vast majority of the people watching this video. The world is still within its first century of industrialization and seems to have spiraled into a system of ruthless capitalism where everything must be paid for. We also heavily get the impression that the Shinra Corporation taxes people very heavily, so the gap between the rich and the poor, the latter of whom seem to make up the vast majority of the populace, is very wide. So continuing with these calculations, mid-level materia costs around 1300 gil, translating to about 205 quid, so that's $250 or 240 euros. The highest level materia that you can buy in shops is on average around 6000 gil, so that would translate to around 950 quid, so that's $1,200 or 1,100 euros. Obviously, this is more of a thought experiment than a scientific comparison, as there are too many variables that we can't account for, but the gist is, perhaps regular people could afford some low-level materia, or perhaps a mid-level materia with a bit of saving over time, but higher-level materia is probably out of their grasp and not worth the expense. Alongside the question of the expense of materia, we also need to question whether regular people can even make use of most of materia, or materia that costs MP at the very least. Because of the nature of the game, we can't know the MP of a regular person, not especially trained. However, if we take a look at the stats of human enemies in the game who are most close to just being a normal human, we can see that they pretty much always have 0 MP. The vice enemy, a simple thief in the Sector 5 slums, has 0 MP. So do Corneo's lackey enemies, and the base Shinra infantry troops. Rufus and Reno also have 0 MP. So if we look at this diegetically, it would imply that most people don't even have MP to be able to use the vast majority of materia that exists, so therefore there isn't any point in them having any. Of course though, it is worth noting that we have no idea how people manage to develop their MP. All of the player characters that we use have MP, but of course they do for gameplay reasons. But having said that, most of them, prior to us meeting them in the game, have been through significant conflict and hardship, so perhaps the development of MP is related to that in some way. We also know that materia needs to be equipped to a weapon or armour in order to be able to be made use of, which is something that regular people aren't carrying or wearing on their person in any given moment. But we can probably assume that this is more of an abstraction for gameplay mechanics than it is directly translating into the real world of the game. As previously mentioned, Aerith manages to summon Holy when the materia is not in a weapon or armour slot. Circling back to Yuffie's original quote about how the Cetra must have always been at war because materia always seems to relate to battle, this also gives us further indication that the Cetra were not perhaps as peaceful as they first appear, or at least towards one another. Ifalna discusses how there were many tribes. Tribalism historically is suggestive of the concept of otherness and competition rather than cooperation, and therefore conflict. After all, the whole reason everyone couldn't just live in one big tribe in ancient times was due to a particular area having a finite number of resources, so it could therefore only support a finite number of individuals. So a tribe would eventually have no choice but to break apart and migrate. But where these tribes would come across each other into close contact and into each other's territories, resource competition would take place and naturally conflict would occur. And if we entertain the idea in the same way that summons could come to exist if enough people who passed on believed in them, then perhaps also one tribe of Cetra actually created the black materia by cultivating it through their tribe's collective consciousness. And another tribe had to cultivate Holy to counter it. However, this is more conjecture, and we can't really know exactly how and why these two exceptionally powerful materias came into existence. So we know how people make use of materia, but do monsters use materia? Generally speaking, monsters seem to use physical attacks that have some magical properties, or magical attacks with their own unique names and properties that are akin to materia that we can obtain within the game. However, we could argue that some monsters do use materia, especially when they explicitly use spells that we as the player use on our equipped materia. Interestingly, these are often, but not exclusively, enemies that have a humanoid appearance, which in fiction is often suggestive of them having human-esque traits such as intelligence or a rudimentary social structure. And of course, materia would need a degree of intelligence to use as it needs equipping and so forth. We do of course fight a boss called Materia Keeper, although I can't really figure out why he's called this. We get no lore explanation that he is hoarding materia or something, and the only materia-based attack he uses is Cure 2, and of course the enemy skill Trine. It is worth noting, however, that we never ever receive magic as a reward from battles. It is never included in the loot after a battle, and we can never steal or morph materia from enemies either. So it would seem that most monsters don't use materia, and perhaps a few do. Therefore we can assume that like the Cetra, monsters still have a primordial bond with the planet that humans lost, which further implies that monsters are a natural, and perhaps intended, part of the flora and fauna of the planet, and that raises interesting implications about the sentience of the planet, but I may well explore the origin and implications of monsters in a subsequent video. We could also wonder, is there more materia in the world that we ourselves never come across? Well, of course this is possible, but of course the game never gives us any hint that this is true. Now this is something where you need to temper your understanding of gameplay with how it fits into the lore, but if the huge materia imbue us with a set of master materia of a certain colour once we have collected all of them, that would support the idea that we can obtain a copy of every materia that exists in the world. But of course, if it was hinted at that there was a materia that we ourselves can never obtain, that would be very frustrating from a gameplay perspective. To speak briefly on the huge materias, we know that they are a highly condensed form of materia exclusively forming within Mako reactors with an energy level 330 times the power level of normal materia. Scarlet began seeking it out earlier in the game on Disc 1. Both the Sister Ray and the rocket explosion aimed at Meteor are powered by huge materia. Shinra see the huge materia for its energy potential, whereas our party view it more as a source of knowledge and part of the planet's life force, as well as having utility in use with other materias. Budenhagen states of them, "Materia of this magnificence may well possess valuable knowledge that has never before been gleaned, and once we have retrieved them all, we can interact with them in some minor ways in his observatory. We can obtain Behemoth Zero materia and also obtain master materia sets by performing a materia blend. This is where the complete set of mastered materia of one materia type can be blended to form one materia orb which contains every single spell or command of a certain materia type. But beyond this, I feel from a story perspective, the developers missed out on weaving the huge materia into the game better. We went to all the trouble of collecting them, and yes, for the sake of protecting them in terms of them being a not insubstantial proportion of the planet's life force, it was worth saving them from being used as disposable weapons. However, we never actually garner any knowledge from them beyond this to aid us in our fight to save the planet and defeat Sephiroth. I feel they could have been incorporated more heavily into the plot, considering half of the second disc of the game is spent fighting for them. And to end on a lighter note, and also as I could find no way to fit this piece of trivia into any of the other main topics, there seems to be some kind of relationship between chocobos and materia. 3 times in the game, interacting with a chocobo results in it lobbing a piece of rare, exclusive materia at us, with one of those times making us suffer through a 30-second unskippable chocobo dance choreography in order to obtain the materia. However, I honestly have nothing further to extrapolate or infer about this, but just wanted to add it nonetheless. I feel materia is a great core gameplay mechanic and very compelling overall, but I may discuss its weaknesses as well as some other critiques of the game in general in a future video. However, the way they have incorporated this game mechanic into the internal lore of the world is really well done and interesting to explore. I feel perhaps they could have expounded on if materia is used outside of battle or not, and if not, why not, a bit better in the script for the game. But I also understand that they wanted to keep it focused on how it was already, and having materia being used so overtly in the day-to-day life outside of battle would perhaps fundamentally change the world and lives of the people of FF7, and therefore make the game world less analogous to our own and therefore less relatable and immersive overall.